there's been a lot of criticism of the Trump administration over what will be the end game in Iran, and I'll get that in a second, but they've also said, what is your agenda? And they've criticized Trump, for example, citing that he wants to demilitarize Iran so it doesn't have ballistic missiles and or drones and the capability to attack its neighbors, or that it wanted to ensure that it did not have a nuclear weapon, which the Iranians themselves brag that they have the ability to make 11 right now, should they wish, or had we not bombed. There's also an agenda, his critics say, well, he wants to overthrow the government or at least help the protesters. Well, he wants to do all three. They're not mutually incompatible. When we went to World War II, we really didn't know what the ultimate aim was. Joseph Stalin was our nominal ally, and he was shocked when Roosevelt and Churchill kind of on the fly in 1940 at the Casablanca conference said, actually, our aim is unconditional surrender. Nobody thought it was at the time. Was the purpose in World War II to just fight them to a standstill? That's what Russia originally thought. Was it to destroy the Nazi government? Was it to reclaim all of Western Europe and then make sure that they were democratic governments? Is that what we said? We didn't say we were going to do that in the Eastern Europe. We thought we were, but there were a lot of aims in World War II, both in the Pacific and the European theater. That happens in war. A lot of things are articulated as you go on. As far as the outcome, I think there's three possible outcomes, and there is sort of a deadline that is self-imposed. We're only 8 months from the November midterms, and it will be adjudicated on the economy, and Trump is not talking about the economy because he has his hands full with Venezuela and the Iran war. People have talked about Cuba. At some point, very quickly, he's going to have to pivot and start talking about the economy and the good things that he will argue that he has done, and he has to get the tensions lowered so that oil tankers and commerce can go freely out of the Straits of Hormuz and gas prices will go back. Kind of ironic for Democrats that gas prices have risen when they were 30 or 40 cents lower than the average under Joe Biden. So they have risen temporarily due to speculation because, after all, we're the largest oil producer in the world and self-sufficient in oil. It's speculation about what might happen next that's raising oil prices. So there is a pressure on this administration to get the job done. And there's going to be three possible outcomes, and we haven't articulated which it is. Some are impalpable, one is impalpable, one is favorable. The first is that we put so much pressure on the Iranian theocracy that would be defined by destroying its infrastructure, its meetings, its leadership, its military, its weaponry. The Revolutionary Guards are scattered and attrited, and at some point there is going to be either a call for him to say no more, no mas. We're losing our entire country's military infrastructure. We have no Air Force now. We have no Navy now. We have very few missiles. We give up. We can't take it anymore. Okay, and that would be followed then by a popular uprising, and that would mean the demonstrators, then the theocracy would say, we can't do it anymore. People who had demonstrated, 30-something thousand had been killed in the last, they would pour back out on the streets. There would be an interim coalition government. Dissidents in Europe or the Shah's son, some people would come over and they would have explicit instructions to form a coalition transitory government, leading the way to a consensual government with elections supervised by outside powers, the EU, NATO, who knows. And eventually, within a few months, there would be an elected government with the warning that they will not allow the theocrats to come back and participate, just as Germany didn't allow the Nazis to participate in the government. And they would be under strict instructions that they can't get a bomb and they have to dismantle their missiles, if there's any left, for particular period of time or whether inspected. That would be the optimum choice. In other words, regime change, demilitarization, constitutional government. Iran goes from being the problem in the entire Middle East in its efforts to make a Shia revolution and overthrow the Gulf states, destroy Israel, etc. No, now it is a force for good and a force multiplier of the Abrams Accord, etc. The second possible solution, I would call it the Venezuelan solution, with the caveat we don't know how Venezuela is going to work. But in this scenario, we get somebody who is a dissident or had ties with a former government but is secular, such as a military general, one of the lower generals, 1 or 2 star, that haven't been formidable figures in the top hierarchy of the theocracy, and they come and say the malocracy is dead and most of the generals are dead, and I represent dissident generals that want to stop this war, and we promise you that we will agree to the negotiation demands before the war to stop the ballistic missiles, stop the huge subsidies to the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas. We will stop all nuclear proliferation. We'll allow you to come in, and we will exercise power with the proviso, if the people want us to have a transition, we're willing to talk about that. That's not so good because you're not getting the dissidents and the people immediately in the process. But on the other hand, you have somebody who has power in the government and supposedly would be backed by what's left of the army to get rid of theocracy and could serve as a useful kind of Venezuelan partial transition, as we saw earlier in the year. And finally, the worst scenario, but it might happen, I would call it stewing in their own juice. At some point, a month, 6 weeks, we've done about all we can. In other words, we've destroyed the military ability in every aspect of Iran to hurt its neighbors, at least for the foreseeable future. We may even have found their nuclear material. We've wiped out their leadership, but there's still people fighting, and we don't want to go there in the ground. And so we just say, well, see you, wouldn't want to be you. We've done what we can. It'll take anybody who takes power 5 to 10 years. We hope that you people who were so brave to go out on the street will now, after we've stopped bombing, it's in your hands. We're not going to tell you to have a consensual government. We're not going to try to keep wiping out your enemies. We're done. We did this for a month or 6 weeks, and it's up to you now to take the reins and create your own type of government according to your own wishes, with a caveat: if you let the malocracy come back, we will be back. But for now on, we're not going to put ground troops. We're done. And that would be the third. Obviously, the best thing in the world would be to have the Ayatollahs completely out of the picture, completely impotent, the army disbanded, or at least not in service to the theocracy, a transitional figure coming in who would agree to a constitutional government with elections, and dissidents would flock back, and that would be a wonderful thing to see a consensual government around. The second best would be a Venezuelan solution, a strong man, keeps order, but does not allow nuclear proliferation or aggression against its neighbors for the time being. The third was, we've done enough. We've defanged the tiger, and we don't really know what's going to happen, but from time to time we'll check in. But in the meantime, we hope you dissidents, we hope you could do something, but it's not our job, not our responsibility. And I can even confess, as a rural resident who grew up and isolated on a farm, I don't recall anybody being Jewish, and I had never met anybody Jewish till I was 18 years old when I went to the University of California campus at Santa Cruz. And for the first time in my life, I met somebody who said he was Jewish. So I don't come to this issue with any particular hidden agenda, whether it's Christian Zionist, that's a new term that's in use now, or as an advocate of Jewish Americans or Israelis. I do it for one reason. I support Israel for one reason. It is in the interest of my country and the United States. Now, why would that be? I'll give you one example. In 2012, 13, and 14, the United States embarked on a joint missile defense program with Poland and the Czech Republic in Eastern Europe. You know that because in 2012, that same year, Barack Obama was caught on a hot mic right before his campaign that he was willing to be flexible on missile defense in Eastern Europe, i.e. give it up if Vladimir Putin would give him space before his re-election, i.e. don't invade Ukraine or don't invade anybody like you did in 2008 with Ossetia. Both of them kept the bargain. Putin didn't invade, and for 2 years Obama was re-elected, and they removed missile defense. But what was the missile defense for? It wasn't to protect us. It couldn't, from Russia's 7,000 nuclear tipped missiles. It was designed to protect Europe from Iran. They were paranoid that, unlike us, they were in range of new Iranian missiles, and Iran was considered hell-bent on getting a nuclear weapon. So it was in our interest, forget Israel, forget anything else in the Cold War vis-a-vis the prior Cold War between Russia and the United States. It was in NATO's interest to protect the European continent from whom? Iran. And that made sense, didn't it? Because Iran had killed almost, if not more, Americans than ISIS had, or Al-Qaeda had. Al-Qaeda was responsible via bin Laden for 3,000 deaths on September 11, 2001. But Iranian Shia terrorists all over the globe had killed Americans. They killed Americans in Beirut, in the Marine barracks, in the embassy. They gave shaped charges to our enemies in Iraq and probably were responsible for over 2,000 American soldiers dying or being maimed. So they were existential enemies of America, and we had taken efforts well aside from Israel to protect our allies and ourselves from Iranians. And that theocratic anti-American government. There was another reason, too. We tend to often favor democratic or consensual societies over their antitheses. That's why all of the NATO governments now are consensual, our closest ally. That's why Australia, we are a close ally, and New Zealand, they are consensual. That's why we are closer to Canada than we are to Mexico, because it's more consensual. That's why we are good friends now with Japan. It's a consensual government in a way it was not during World War II. We're consensual government. We see a consensual government in South Korea. Okay, so what is Israel? Israel is a consensual government. It's surrounded by 500 million people of the Islamic world, Shia and Sunni, Iranian and Arab, that aren't. They're not consensual. There's only one government that is truly a free, democratic government, and that's Israel. So it has affinities with the United States and interest with the United States that transcends anything to do with the 7 million Americans who are Jewish Americans. That's just a given. They are not directing American policy. They couldn't unless Israel was democratic, consensual, Western, an outpost in a dangerous part of the world that has key resources for global prosperity with oil, and more importantly, is an enemy of our existential enemy that transcends any question of Israeli or Iranian animosity, and that's the theocratic government of Iran that began its existence by taking American hostage and storming our embassy. There's another question as well, is we have all sorts of quasi-allies, of course, that are not consensual, and we give them a lot of money. We give Jordan over $1 billion. We give Egypt over $600 million. We give a country that can be very, very anti-American all sorts of help. Fellow Turkish member, Mr. Erdogan's government in Ankara. And we don't require any prior litmus test that they be constitutional or consensual, but nobody seems to object that all the money we give these countries are all the support. So why would you not object for us offering military assistance to Turkey that isn't consensual fully and still illegally occupies northern Cyprus, but you would object to military assistance to Israel that is consensual and shares exactly the same enemies as the United States does, and these enemies are prior to and not relevant to Israel's particular enemies. We would not be friendly with the Iranians regardless of Israel. They took our embassy and they've killed hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans for reasons other than we support Israel. In other words, it's in our self-interest to stop Iran from posing an existential threat to Europe or ourselves, from killing American soldiers, and for trying to disrupt and unsettle the entire Middle East, where 40% of the world's oil is from. And that is well aside from the fact that Israel, the so-called Holy Land, is the foundation the home, the birthplace of the Judeo-Christian tradition. That is a reason, but it's not the only reason. It's not even the primary reason, nor is the advocacy of Jewish Americans. The primary reason we support Israel, it's in our cold, hard self-interest.